Welcome everyone to Moreland University's webinar, Enhance Teaching and Learning with Student Projects. We're so glad that you've joined us and we welcome you to this virtual space. At Moreland University, our mission is teaching teachers around the world to be resourceful problem solvers and tech-savvy educators through an online collaborative activity-based learning system designed for tomorrow's students in a dynamic and diverse world. To meet that mission, we are thrilled to offer nationally accredited online teacher certification programs, master's degrees, and professional developments. We welcome our alums, as well as current candidates and folks who are brand new to Moreland University to this webinar today. Our teacher certification program prepares you to be able to teach any subject and grade level from pre-K to 12. And after completing that program, you can apply for a US teaching certification or license in one or more subject areas and grade levels. We start cohorts every single month of the year, and the program lasts 9 months. This program is designed with teachers in mind. And so it is affordable, it is accessible online, worldwide. We believe in collaboration through our cohort model, and we integrate an impactful student teaching clinical experience. In addition, we have master's degrees that we offer that last 1 year. We utilize a curriculum built around research-proven instructional methods coupled with cutting-edge and innovative approaches. We offer a master's in educational leadership in addition to our add-on master's degrees to our teacher preparation program with specialization in early childhood education, special education, teaching multilingual learners, and educational technology. And all we do at Moreland University, we support and empower teachers. And we hope that our current candidates, our alums who are present, will be able to participate actively in this webinar to learn as they continue their professional development, and that anyone interested in learning more about our teacher preparation program or our master's degrees will reach out for more information. In today's webinar, we'll start with some panelist introductions as we dive into 3 questions about student projects. The first question will revolve around project driving questions and themes, while the second will revolve around developing skills, knowledge, and attributes through student projects. And finally, we'll end, as time permits, with a discussion on using projects as assessment methods. Everything that we cover in today's webinar will be included in a recording and in resources that we will send to everyone who's registered after we're done. With that being said, I'd like to take a few moments to introduce each of our panelists. I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves one by one in the order in which I see them on my screen. So we'll start with Beth Dewhurst, then we'll go to Angela, then Margaret, and then Eddie. Beth, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Beth Dewhurst. I'm really thrilled to be here with you to talk about how to engage learners in project-based learning activities, learner choice in that process, and making connections that are authentic to the world beyond the classroom. I teach all of the modules at Moreland. I love focusing on the clinical at the end of the program, as well as the Ed Tech Master's program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angie. I'm relatively new to Moreland, so I'm very excited to be here. The majority of my experience lies within the elementary classroom. So those of you who are in that same position, I can relate to you very well. I love creativity in the classroom. I love immersion experiences and theme-based learning. So I hope I have information that'll help you today.
My name's Margaret Noble-Jackson, and I also am in elementary. I have used project-based learning for a variety of things. My most favorite was for classroom management. And I hope I bring a different spin. I've been with Moreland University for a year now. I got my degree. I came out of the work for the corporate workplace and got certified as a teacher at Moreland University and got my master's, and here I am.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Eddie Johns. I'm an instructor here at Moreland University. I have over 10 years of experience teaching and working in Asia, including Thailand and China. I am also an alum of the Teach Now Moreland University program, and really love project-based learning or projects, doing them in classes. It really provides a really thoughtful and practical use of information we're teaching inside of the classroom.
And my name is Joey Pearson. I am honored to be the Professional Development Officer at Moreland University, serving to uplift and engage and empower our community of faculty members, candidates, alums, and thrilled to be moderating this discussion today. Let's go ahead and dive in. Student projects are innovative, joyful, and frankly, data-rich ways of teaching and evaluating learning. Open-ended and creative projects allow students to investigate, experiment, and collaborate. We're going to hear from the faculty members who just introduced themselves from Moreland University as we discover innovative and impactful student projects created by teachers here in the Teach Now teacher preparation program and in our master's degrees in education, as well as in the experiences of these expert faculty members here today. Throughout our discussion, you will observe student projects teachers have used, and you're going to learn some best practices to build and use projects in your own classroom immediately. As I've mentioned, after this webinar, I'm going to share a recording and all the resources so that you can use them and share them with colleagues in your schools who might need them the most. Our first question really gets to the design process of student projects. The driving questions of a project prompts students to investigate a real-world problem. Students develop grade-level skills and master standards by exploring those driving questions. When designing and planning a student project, it's critical that we as educators start with a driving question, a real-world problem, or other theme to orient student learning and collaboration. Panelists, from your teaching experience and the work of your candidates in the Teach Now program, what are some examples of driving questions, real-world problems, or other themes that have led to a powerful student project? Why was that driving question particularly impactful? Beth, would you lead for us today, please?
Sure, I'm happy to. And Joe, if you wouldn't mind, if you would show the plastics project from the slides, that might be helpful. We'll start with a very concrete example of a question and a project. And I want to stipulate, as Joey cues this up, that I realize not everybody's teaching Seaside. So when you see this, but I think it brings up an interesting question of, and I certainly know this from teaching with Moreland candidates, there's all different capacities in terms of time, resources, location, and student needs that might drive our question in the first place. But starting with a very concrete example, this is an art teacher working with upper elementary, middle school age learners, but he's clearly here incorporating not just art, but science as they explored a local pollution problem. And he began by asking what are some prior knowledge and real life connections each learner had. You see two, employment and food, but he had about 15 of these full-size pictures. They made a sort of a mural about them that began the conversation about the sea that's right next to their school, and eventually whittled it down to the learner's question of, how can we address this problem of plastics that we see every day? And so in the lower left corner, you see part of the answer, which was to go out and pick it up. And if you go to I think the next slide or two, you'll see what they did from there. On the right, he facilitated them sorting what they collected in a safe way. It's not a biological hazard, hopefully. But they had to sort out, what did they find and what did the local regulations say needs to happen with it. It's not enough just to pick it up. Where do we go from there? And what happens to the plastic? You can see they then got on and had their own individual questions in the other picture where they began researching answers to these questions and then embedded the actual things they found on their advocacy posters in the lower left corner. The other thing I'll just note about how they answered this question is that you see the end reflection, but this teacher had reflections before, during, and after here at the end, how they were doing in answering their questions, and that opened up possibilities for revising those questions along the way. This is a different project which we can talk about, but I'll pause there about how the question was generated and then how it evolved over the course of the project.
I've been really impressed with the way the candidates have thought of things that really affect them culturally and specific in their situations. I had one group do food was not as plentiful as in their particular country that they were in, and they wanted to have good, nutritious food. And so they thought about introducing a garden. And I don't have pictures for this, but they asked the students, what, this is what you get to eat for lunch. What would you like to eat for lunch? And went off from that. And I think that's powerful, because then you're connecting the material with a student need and real life for them.
I was actually going to piggyback on that, Margaret, because I think that's, in my experience, that's really the key to making a project of any kind or a thematic unit, whether it's a problem-based unit or just a theme you're working with students, is you have to have student buy-in. And it doesn't matter whether they're 3 or 23, that student buy-in, if it's relevant to them, then it's going to be engaging to them. And so I know a lot of you from the poll are working with younger students, and I have just to remind you, even if you're working with those itty bitties, they have really powerful thoughts. And so finding something that is relevant to them, and then you may, with the younger students, have to guide them to turn that into like a driving question, whereas your older students are going to be able to do that and verbalize that themselves. But don't sort of undercut the younger students thinking that they can't solve a problem, because they're really inquisitive and they have a different view of the world than what we do as adults. And so sometimes when you make it more relevant to them and their life, you'll be really surprised with what they have to say about it.
Well, and Angela, just to really dig deep into what you're sharing, the idea here that I'm hearing from you is that the driving question has to be relevant and important to students to increase their engagement and to help them to see themselves reflected. I think that's also what Margaret was alluding to in her response. Eddie, what is your thought, having taught in the international school world for so long?
Sure. I mean, so I completely agree with what everybody had just sort of said. And, I'm kind of going to be taking a little bit more of a twist here, because I think, when I first started teaching in the classroom, one of the things is that I didn't even really know how to, ask a, driving question per se. And, what happens if you don't know how to ask that question? And, for me, I think sometimes we have to start from, where we are and take, what we're teaching in terms of content to then, and almost experiment with that. And then sometimes you kind of think about it in hindsight, what it is that you were sort of doing. For example, I was an ESL teacher in China and for high school. And, we have a textbook that has, the skills they're supposed to, teach. And, one of the things I could have done is just have them, fill in the blank and, just repeat after me. But I've always found that wasn't necessarily, that didn't really provide that real life experience, that kind of deeper connection. And so there was this one unit, for example, called Wild Weather, in which we learned about tornadoes and, et cetera, storms, flooding, et cetera. And I thought to myself, well, how can I make this project, interesting, while also taking the different concepts like vocabulary and grammar structures, et cetera, and turn that into a project that students will really digest the information. Because, when you fill in a piece of a blank, that doesn't necessarily mean students fully understand what that means, right? They only know the skills. And so I had this interesting project where I had the students, while incorporating all this vocabulary and grammar, etc., create sort of a costume contest in which they choose one of the 6 or 7 wild weathers, and they needed to design a costume based upon the wild weather, and then create a speech, explain each of the design elements of the costume, and then in that speech they had to incorporate all of the, the vocabulary and grammar elements or whatever it is that they're trying to do. And so when I first was doing this, there wasn't really a driving question, but after thinking about it, really by doing this, it kind of really a driving question would be kind of like, how can we inspire public awareness and the impact of wild weather, through this content, essentially. And so sometimes if you're beginning, just do it and then go back and look at it and then think of what is it that you really achieved in terms of the real life connection, just to start off. Yeah.
I was just going to piggy on that. For those that are teaching really young learners, I have had the opportunity to do that similar theme with young learners by doing stations, sandboxes with letting them pour pictures, fans, and watching the wind go. And so there's lots of things you can do with all kinds of learners. And so I just wanted you to think of those little tiny learners that that might help.
In addition, just kind of like what Eddie was saying, I think if you are new to starting project-based learning, don't overwhelm yourself, because kind of what Eddie's saying is sort of the natural cycle in designing something like that. The first time you do it, you're going to have the opportunity to look back and say, well, that was really great, but I would alter this, that, and the other. And that reflection process is what will make it better year after year, whether or not it's the same project or not. You'll have more knowledge. So I would say don't be afraid to jump into it, because even if you jump in and it's not a wild success like you would hope the very first time, you're going to have so much more experience with, like Eddie said, like designing the guiding question and figuring out the process of organizing it. So don't let the idea of it overwhelm you.
I just want to add the backdrop for my thinking is how inquisitive is the overall climate of the classroom. Is it okay to ask questions and not know the answers right away? If it's a good open-ended question, I, as the teacher, probably don't know the answer, and we're going to figure this out and build knowledge together. Kath Murdoch is a wonderful author who has really shaped my instruction. I'll drop a link in the chat. And she really talks about, having things in the classroom or a walk around the school or the block outside, and just noticing the questions that come up organically can really lead to wonderful driving questions and projects of inquiry.
What I'm hearing is that the development of driving questions can really be an iterative process. And what I mean by that is that it naturally develops after students begin engaging with the content, after we get to know our students and their passions, after we begin to dive into the content we're learning and developing, those questions can change. And we need to be ready to pivot and respond to the needs of our students. At Moreland, we believe in student-centered, student-led instruction. And so everything we do here guides teachers to be able to prepare classroom instructional learning opportunities that place students in the center of learning as the leaders in the classroom. And these discussions that we're having around student projects really model the sorts of conversations that happen in our virtual classes with the candidates who go through our program each and every day. I'd like to drive a little bit deeper and talk a little bit more about the content that I believe Eddie started talking about a couple moments ago. Student projects promote student learning by creating student-centered environments. They create also student-centered and creative means by which students learn core skills and knowledge. To the panelists, I ask, What are some innovative ways teachers have leveraged projects to teach grade level content and the key skills and attributes that each student needs to meet their own goals and prepare for college or career? We'd love to hear you share some insights based on your work with students in your own classrooms or work with candidates in the Teach Now program or in our master's degree in education program.
I have two specific things in mind, and one of them came directly from a cohort that I worked with. So Joey, if you want to just show for a minute that project, and if you can go to the page that they created that was the cross-curricular goals for that. Awesome. So this particular partner group worked on a project during Module 3 that I thought was just really inspiring. So they took the idea of food waste. That was their main theme. And their driving question was, how can they reduce food waste and educate students about the whole process and everything that is involved in it. And so this was for a high school level group. So those of you who are high school level or higher, this will pertain a little more to you. But what I really liked about this is that they were able to hit so many different subject areas. And Joey, I don't know if you have the second piece of this or not. That's okay if you don't. On their cross-curricular goals, one of the things that they had listed that I thought was really ingenious was they, because it's a high school group of students and they have foreign language, one of their cross-curricular goals was going to be to work with the students who are currently taking German and connect with students in Germany. And so they're not only going to utilize the language, but then also utilize the language in order to learn more about food processes in another country. So that was just one of the many areas that they, were able to make those connections. You can take that off, so if you want. But then also, I mean, in thinking about just the general idea of hitting all of those goals, I think sometimes as a teacher, you just have to take the project idea that you have and break it down, because it's really amazing how you can see so many different areas that will fit into one project, whether it's a week long or whether it's a whole school year long. You'll be able to take your grade level standards and pick through those and say, well, I can apply this here. I can apply, this in this particular area. So I just think that it's a process of thinking through it and asking yourself, what can you plug into those projects?
I'll talk about, I had an opportunity to be in a classroom, a second grade classroom that was, a teacher had been removed, and it was a very difficult classroom where 3 teachers had quit, and they called me in and they said, we need to help these kids. And so I decided, if I went in, I saw what the problems were, and I just started rewarding good behavior to start out with. But then I thought about teaching them what it is to be part of a community. And so I sat them down and I said, what does it mean to be part of a community? And taught them what that was. There were questions. Well, what is a community? And I says, well, it's your house, it's the school. We talked a little bit, they're all young, they don't know. And then I said, do you want to build a community? And so we ended up building a 5 by 4 feet community where each of the students took on a job. One was the fireman, one was the doctor, one was the grocery store owner, one was the librarian, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And over a period of about 6 or 7 weeks, we created this model community with each of them having a job. And when I started that, I was still having these disruptions and everything. But as soon as everyone realized that they were important in the job and they had things that they just only they could do, Sometimes the stronger kids would come and say, no, you need to do it this way. No, that's his job. He gets to decide what. And it didn't really matter if he did the doctor job perfectly the way a real doctor does it, but he was doing his best, and everybody gained. When that was done, they became more proud of what they were doing, and they treated each other better. And then we were able to even further it to, okay, who makes the decisions at this school? Because some of them, when I got in there, didn't like school. It wasn't fun. They didn't like it. So who makes the decisions of the school? And so we ended up actually having a school board meeting. There was a president, the doctor was the president, I believe the farmer was the vice president, and then there was a grocery store owner, the park recreation manager, and they all had a school board. And it was really, really insightful. But boy, those kids, they were able to have that meeting by themselves, and it was fabulous.
Margaret, you couldn't have primed this any better. Because what I hear in your description is authentic collaboration, so vital for digital age learning and readiness. I think we're seeing an accelerated pace. Not one of us has all the information at any one moment in time. We need an authentic collaborative community to build digital age knowledge. And that's my bias coming through as the ed tech person, master's person. But one of the ways I think we might struggle, I know I've struggled as an educator, is taking my hands off of the situation and trusting that we can course correct as the learning is underway. And I think we're most successful if we do that when we've cleared the path for the learning to happen. In inquiry learning, if we authentically want to know something new, authentic learning means we're going to make mistakes, we're going to redesign, we're going to hit a wall, we're going to have to work together to figure this out, sort it out. And that's where the breakthroughs of really powerful learning, as Margaret shared, come from. But I feel that needs some structure. So the example I'm sharing is one way this teacher did this with elementary learners, where they all owned a part of this, call back to Eddie, weather project. Their group roles were very specific and they did the monitoring and self-regulation using this tool every time they worked together. And it became embedded and automated in how they interacted with each other. They internalized it, but the teacher had to clear the path for what that kind of authentic group work could look like, and give them a way to build those new skills. And I'm sure course correct as they tried it out.
If it's okay, I kind of want to add to that, Beth, because some of the things that you talked about, like, for example, the ownership and, connecting with what Margaret said in terms of, like, the students didn't like school, when we use project is such a powerful way to get students, like, into school and to do something that they're really, interested in, and to really provide that ownership. And this sort of connects to what Sol Kwok in the chat had said is, you have to do a fifth grade project in middle school in Qatar, and how do you inspire them to come up with relevant a relevant question? And to me, when I read your question, I feel that one of the things is that your question is extremely broad, you know what I mean, because there's many different world problems. You made it a little bit more specific by identifying, like, an app. But, for fifth grade students, they, when you give students a all-encompassing question where they can do whatever they want, there are going to be a few students who will be able to work with that. But then there's going to be some students who have no idea what to do. And so, one of the things I might suggest is, provide some categories or provide some, things that they can, more or less, look into. So, for example, maybe there's a social thing that can be done, or environmental thing, or, technological thing. But one of the things that you things that you did with the question is, how do I inspire them to come up with a relevant question? And you have to be a little bit careful when you talk about a relevant question. And I talk about this when, with my students in assessment, whenever you have something in a rubric that is not explicitly stated, you need to make sure that you are able to clearly explain to your students what that means. So what do you mean by relevant? Because if a student comes up to you and provides you a question that is relevant to them, but is not necessarily relevant to you, and you tell them that could potentially hurt their interests in a particular part. So, one of the things is, when students are brainstorming with you, it's almost like your job to help them, take what they have and then, elevate it, because if a student is interested in video games and, the teachers are not interested in video games, well, quite frankly, it doesn't matter what the teacher thinks, because the students are the future, and you have to move yourself and maybe provide them some thoughts to guide them into, introducing some, seemingly traditional, relevant ideas to then, kind of help them design the project while also doing that as well. But you don't be careful about, saying, oh, that's not relevant or stuff like that, and provide a little bit of guidance in that way, and be very open to whatever students share with you. Yeah.
I think too, sort of going along with what all three of you have said, if I kind of going back to embedding 21st century skills into what our projects are, trying to accomplish. One of the things that I've done some crazy things in my fourth grade classroom before, but one of the things that I did, and it took many years to sort of tweak and design, but my students, as they came into fourth grade, knew, and Margaret, this reminded me because you were talking about building a community. So my fourth grade classroom ran like a city. And when students entered, they had to apply for a job. They had to interview with the admin of our school. They had a bank account. I taught them, it's very easy to weave standards into things like this. So I'm teaching them how to manage a checkbook, even though that's a little bit outdated skill. And they held their own campaign. They could campaign to be the mayor. They were taught how to run town hall meetings. And so just those things alone, they all had a job. They ran stores. They did just all of these things. And I was merely the facilitator. I was just there to say, this is what this role, looks like. And from there, they had to collaborate with each other. Our Friday city sessions were just me managing, the noise control. They were making interactions. They were having to work together. They were having to make big decisions. Our mayor got to make big decisions for the class. And so it's just the idea of taking those things we do as adults in our world and making them at a level that students can learn them, because that's lifelong learning. I know that those students may not ever balance a checkbook in the world we live in now. However, they understand adult things. And so just never take for granted that those students aren't capable of learning those, because it was really engaging to them because they felt important. Like Margaret was saying, they had a role, they were a part of the class, and no one else could hold their job. So if so-and-so was sick, then you know what, the store's closed today, because that's their job, that's their role. And so if you look at it from a broader perspective, in terms of what do I want to send these students off into the world knowing what to do, it makes it a little bit easier when you're planning the whole process. And again, it didn't happen overnight. That's something that I worked on for a good 8 years before I felt like I really had a system that worked.
I'd like to add just a little bit to that. As teachers, we want to have control of our classroom. And yet in project-based learning, the control that we should focus on is our facilitator role to make sure that the standards are met. Everything else the kids can decide, and they really are. Even the second graders that I taught and the kindergartners that I've taught and done some projects with, even they came up with ideas that I wouldn't think of, but were totally fine to do. And so I could pull back on what I would plan to do because the students were developing their own way, getting to the same goal. you make sure that they understand what the goal is that you're facilitating, but it's okay to let go. And if you're really nervous about it, let go with one thing one week and go next week another thing. But it'll grow on you, and then you'll realize what you can do with what group, because every group's different too as time goes on.
And just sort of, that's a really great statement, Margaret. And, and to kind of add on to that, as we progress in this new age of teachers, one of the things that we have to consider, is that, project-based learning is really good, or projects is a really excellent tool to use inside of the classroom. But, as teachers, we have to make sure that we are not stuck in the traditional way of teaching, in which a lot, I see a lot of people still, sticking with, what I mean? We have to change the way that we're thinking about the educational paradigm, because traditionally, like, for example, what Margaret just shared, in which we release that control, that wouldn't be something that's promoted. But nowadays, we're finding that a lot of students they lack sort of critical thinking skills, and they lack the ability to do this and that, because they're given this sort of hand-holding method the whole way through. And if we don't allow the students to make mistakes and allow us to release the control of our classrooms, then we're not really benefiting the students. We could potentially be harming them.
Joshua Curtis put a question in the chat space that only we can see currently. But Joshua, I hope that it's okay that I share this with everyone else. How can we best integrate projects in a time-limited, content-heavy classroom? I'm thinking AP, honors, calculus, literature, chemistry, all of the courses that are challenging content to teach. How can we integrate projects into that? And I'd also like to draw everyone's attention into this last perspective in the last about 13 minutes of our time together, which is the perspective of projects as tools for evaluation. I know that's a lot to ask of our panelists, to talk about content-heavy classes and evaluation, but I have faith. I think we can do this. How have teachers, in your experience, been able to craft evaluation methods within their projects that help students grow toward the grade level goals, to learn and demonstrate their understanding of content-heavy classroom material? How have they been able to measure student growth toward key skills and attributes that each need to meet their own goals and prepare for college and or a career? Angela, I'd love for you to start.
Two things in response to, I think it was Joshua's question. I think one of the things to consider, because time is always, there's never enough time in a classroom. There just isn't. I mean, we could spend all day with students and it wouldn't be enough time. So one of the things to think about is that if you're designing a project-based learning experience, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that happens in a short period of time. I took a group of students last year, and we kind of tested out the waters of this sort of individual project-based learning experience. And it was mildly successful. It was the first time that we had done this. But what we did was we carved out minutes out of the week. It was maybe an hour a week that we had in class was all I could devote to that. And it was sort of coupled in with computer class and things like that. But the thing about those projects were that because the students were taken through this process of individually identifying something that was really important to them, something they were really interested in. They had to create a product of some type, and then they presented it, and we invited parents to come in to see their final presentations. And what I learned through that experience is that when students are given guidance as far as how can they take that, for me, it was fourth grade material. They knew they had to incorporate, and they had to identify, these are the fourth grade skills that I've learned this year that I had to put into my project. But the thing about it was that they were so engrossed in the project that they wanted to work on it at recess, and they wanted to work on it at home, and they wanted to work on it on the weekend. And that wasn't the expectation, but because it was so important to them, because it was something that they really were interested in, then that time situation sort of got expanded because they wanted to explore it on their own time. In relation to the second part of that about evaluation, Joey, that project that you were sharing before, I'm not sure if you screenshotted it, and I should have told you the specific piece. However, if you have the screenshot of Mandy, she's the 12th grade teacher. I'm not sure if you have the screenshot of her evaluation process, but what I really liked about her process was their project was to have these students basically host a end of year fundraiser, and the evaluation for it was obviously layered, but the piece of it that I really liked was that two pieces of the evaluation process were for the mentor at the restaurant that they would be working with. That mentor would have to fill out they had created a Google form, so it was real easy for them to create, and they had questions for feedback. But not only that, they took it one step further and put another evaluation piece in there where they were asking the community members to also who attended this fundraiser. They asked the community members to fill out a feedback form, and then on top of that, they had a basic pass or fail for the actual event, which for a 12th grade student, who is trying to learn this real life experience, their evaluation made a lot of sense. It was all of the requirements of this dinner that they were going to be putting on. And on top of that, then they had another rubric where they could assess the content. Thank you, Joey. I know I should have told you about that ahead of time. But anyway, my point being that multi-layered approach is how you're going to get all of the feedback from every piece of that project that you need.
I put in the chat that you really have to, for me, you have to really think backwards. You have to think of the end goal and then allow the students to really use their 21st century skills. And maybe your class doesn't know what that is, but if you teach them, then they are doing exactly what happens, that Angela was speaking about, because they're owning it. It's exciting to them. They want to be a piece of it because they're getting to create and have say in the final goal. And so I think there's so many pieces to it, but where 21st century skills are thriving, then they're going to do much better. I will talk about the assessment piece just a minute. I really think the power of peer assessment, graded, or having them come up with the peer assessment and having everyone be on the same page, that is very powerful in driving quality work. And so I think it's really important that we take the time in our classes to let the students really develop that so that they feel accountable for it.
And I'll kind of add on that, because I think, Margaret, I'm pretty aligned with what you just said and kind of added. And I think the practical thing is that essentially, especially for Joshua, your question is, when it comes to content, especially if you're teaching like AP classes and students have to take exams to do that, that's a practicality of our world today, unfortunately, is that they need to take these exams, which are very, content based. But let me ask everyone a question. When you think back to when you were in high school, or when you were in middle school or in elementary school, how much of content information do you really remember? And if your answer is anything like mine, it's probably not very much, right? So if that's the case, well, what is the purpose of content, besides just filling out a test? But the things that we do remember are, for example, the skills that we learned, as well as the relationships that we learned. And so to some extent, a lot of what is important are those two things, especially the relationship part. Our goal as the teacher is to try to make our students love learning. Because if they love to learn, then they do the work themselves, you know what I mean? And you just provide them a little bit of guidance. So in a way, if you can get them to love to learn, then they're going to do it on their own. But in terms of, projects and whatnot, especially in a content heavy course, projects make teaching content, or at least the students teaching themselves content, a lot more effective and efficient. Because if you set it up correctly, where they're covering all the different points of content that you want them to learn, on various levels and whatnot, then they're going to hit those things. Because if they don't, then you're going to know, and which adds into the evaluation thing, right? Projects don't just get evaluated at the end of the project. You have to make sure that you're monitoring the project throughout. And so, a lot of times when I used to do the wild weather project, to get to the end and everybody would get, A's and stuff like that. And I was like, maybe I'm not being strict enough. But then I realize now, the reason why is because I am constantly monitoring them, making sure that their poster is good, that their script is okay, that they have the support they need to go well. And so when they're presenting it, they did everything the way that they needed to do, and thus getting the higher grade. So remember that projects are a really effective and efficient way of getting students to learn to love. And if you get them to learn to love through projects, then they're gonna learn and do really well on their own.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think when we have a lot to do, we have to think creatively about how we're going to get from the beginning, middle, and end. And so if the learners are pumped up and excited, as Angela was saying, to do things on their own, and we've got them loving the topic because it matters to them, then another way we could clear the path and facilitate this project, a lot of things happening, including being prepared for a high stakes exam, would be to set things up so learners can work asynchronously with each other. A simple app like Padlet, and I realize you may not have that at your particular school or in your country, but there are all kinds of free things available to educators that we can play around with. We can ask our learners what they want to use. And it very quickly becomes apparent that we can work smarter, not harder, if we look at technology and how that can facilitate all of the great things that we just heard the other three panelists say. It doesn't all need to happen in real time in the classroom. In the same way, the learning product, the project that they produce, can be driven and shaped by their choice of technology. Again, just going back to a simple example like Padlet, within Padlet, you've got just about every tech tool available all in the same digital bulletin board that they can just pick and choose, and you don't have to set anything up or teach them anything except where to click. So I think there's a lot that we can consider. Yep. We're hearing Padlet in the chat. There's lots of things that we can consider, that we just start small and figure out one thing to try and then reflect on that. The biggest push we can see in learning gains comes from the reflection and adjustments we make as educators. That's a major theme in ed research. And so it's worth it to try how technology might be helpful in the heavy lift of clearing the path with a lot of content. Even if there's a high stakes exam at the end, the learning can happen asynchronously and with a lot of creativity along the way.
Right. Well, we have come to the end of our hour. I cannot believe it. I feel like we're just getting started, but this is the nature of these sorts of conversations. And I just want to share with everyone here, particularly those of you who are part of the Teach Now community already. This is a lot like what happens on a weekly basis in our virtual classrooms. We engage in conversations around the most important topics in education so that teachers are prepared to change the lives of students wherever they happen to be in the world. We have some fabulous people with us today. I want to say thank you to Dr. Beth Dewhurst, Dr. Eddie Johns, Angela Haller, and Margaret Noble Jackson for being here. Angela, you've been called out. Someone has asked, someone asked, hi, Ms. Haller, have you written any books about how you set up your classroom like a city? So Angela, we're waiting on your book and look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, I have not yet, but I do like to write, so I'll consider that.
And to all of our panelists, I say thank you for being here. To everyone who has joined us over the past hour from all over the world, our community members and folks who have yet to join the Moreland community, I say thank you and welcome, and hopefully you can find space to reach your professional goals, to develop as the educator that you are capable of becoming with Moreland University. To get you excited about our upcoming webinar in the month of February, we will come back together with a few different experts from the Moreland faculty to talk about educational technology and artificial intelligence. And we may even be able to peek into a virtual classroom in February to see what it looks like and to hear from the candidates themselves as they talk through their learning and demonstrate for us what it's like to be a candidate in our programs. So stay tuned for that. If you are interested in reviewing the recording or any of the resources discussed, please check your email for a recording and a blog post that will summarize a lot of what we talked about here. And finally, please share this resource with anyone in your network who might benefit from the recording of this webinar or any of the information we discussed. And please share Moreland University with any teachers who might need help with teacher certification or master's degrees in education. On behalf of Moreland University and the thousands of candidates who have gone through our program and the hundreds of faculty members who come together every day to make sure that this is the best program in the world, I say thank you and have a fabulous rest of your day. Bye-bye, everyone.